Hello and welcome to Upper Pen. My name is Dakota, and today I have a very special guest, Josh Getzler, who is a literary agent with HG Literary. So thank you so much for being here, Josh.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Dakota.
So before we get into what you do as an agent, how did you kind of get to being an agent? What's your background?
Sure. It actually it has a couple of twists and turns because I had gotten into publishing after I was in college, and I knew I wanted to be in publishing. I knew I wanted to. What so many people who want to get into this do is I wanted to be an editor of literary fiction for a literary house, in 1991, the way that you did that was you looked in the New York Times and they had ads, and you called people and wrote letters with real paper and put in applications. And so I ended up getting a wonderful job at Harcourt Brace at the time with an editor who was 74 and sort of a legend. Her name was Anne Friedgood, and she's the person who found Roots, and she had worked with Faulkner, and I had just done my senior thesis on Faulkner, and I was about to die. And so I ended up working for her as her assistant for 3 years, and learned a lot about the way that publishing had been running for the 50 years before that, right? And realized as well when I was in it that the economics and the finance of publishing was odd, which it is. It remains odd. And I started to be allowed to take on books. And I realized that while I knew a lot about editing and I knew a lot about, the process of putting a book together, I didn't know anything about the business side of it. And so I ended up applying to and going to business school and getting an MBA. And in the midst of getting the MBA, I switched gears a little bit and I went into minor league baseball for 12 years and ran a couple of teams, one in upstate New York, in Watertown, New York, which is very, very far up near Canada, and then in Staten Island for a Yankees affiliate for about 9 years. And so I did that until 2007, and then realized that I really wanted to get back into books, and realized as well that I was, 38 years old and I had a family and I couldn't be an editorial assistant again, and wasn't going to get a job in another area of, a higher level in a publishing house because I had been gone I'd been gone 13 years. But I could go and try to be an agent. And because the barriers to entry were different, and and the upside was different as well if you could make it. So I ended up talking to people and got a job as a very old assistant at Writer's House, as an agent's assistant for Simon and Lipscar and Dan Lazar. And I was 15 years older than my boss. And he was sort of said, "Well, what happens if I want coffee?" And it's sort of like, "Well, I'll get you coffee, whatever, it's fine." And I learned a ton there, and learned how the industry had changed in 13 years. I learned that, everything was online where nothing had been online. I mean, when I was at Harcourt, I brought my, Mac that was a box with me to the office. It was not attached to anything else except a printer, and had to convince people to create any kind of network at all. Came back, and submissions were all done by email, and queries were all done by email. And the barrier between a writer and an agent was very, very small, as opposed to what it had been before when a writer would write a book and then have to print it out and copy it however many times before they got, to send out and have postage and send the books out to agents. And then agents had to really think very hard as well about which publishers to send books to, because you also had to print out the final copy and put it into boxes and put them into the mail. And I mean, my first 3 years working as an editorial assistant, I spent half my time Xeroxing, uh, which is completely different now. And on one hand, is much more democratic in that, if you're a writer and you want to make a connection with somebody, everybody is, online, and everybody is theoretically able to take a look at your material. The reality of that for the amount of work that agents and editors have is different because it's also considerably larger, because I can, instead of going to 8 publishers with a book, I can go to 22. And not only I can, but every other agent can. So everybody has a lot more work. And if I might have been getting 20 or 25 queries in a week, uh, back in the day, now you can get 100. And so it's a very different speed to the business because of that, even though you're fundamentally doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so I mean, so that's what I did. So I did that for 3 years. Then I moved over after I started taking books on. I moved over from Writer's House to another agency, Russell and Volkening, which was a very literary agency. Writer's House was much more commercial. I had been doing, I'd gotten a number of clients. I'd made a number of deals, but they were now um, in mystery and in thriller and in a little bit of science fiction, a little bit of children's books, different from when I went to Russell and Volkening, where we had, Nobel Prize winners and very, very literary fiction. So I had to show different kind of chops when I was there. And then a couple of years after that, we went to I joined two of my colleagues, and we created at the time HSG, which a few years later became HG Literary when one of our partners left. And so now I've been running that since 2011, and we have 13 agents in our agency. We represent a pretty wide gamut of genres and of authors, and I do about 75% adult fiction, of which most of that is crime of one kind or another. And we represent children's books, and we represent all different kinds of genres as well. So that's us.
That is quite an introduction. You have a very varied career, I guess.
No, it's been fascinating, and it's a great industry, and it's been an awful lot of fun to join and rejoin and see the way that it has moved.
For folks who don't know, me included, what is the main difference between an editor and an agent? So how do you differentiate these two things?
Sure. And in some ways they've moved a little bit together over the years, because back in the days of Swifty Lazar in the 50s, an agent would talk to a writer. They would say, hey, Bill Faulkner, oh, you have a new book, great. Send it off to an editor, and you're done with it. You just negotiate a contract, and you're done with it. Now, before I send a book out to a publishing house, I spend a considerable amount of time, and my colleagues do as well, in the editorial process. And so, on some level, we're the first level, editors of books. But at its core, you know, agents sell books to publishers. So we are the sell side, publishers are the buy side of manuscripts. After which publishers become the sell side to consumers.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's we're sort of two sides of the coin. So a writer comes to us first. We're the gatekeepers on that level, and for good or ill, and people have different thoughts on that for sure. But what we do is we take manuscripts at their primary level, having been finished, or in nonfiction cases when they're in proposal form often. And we put them in the best possible shape to try to sell them to a publisher. And then the sort of special sauce that an agent has um, is that we should know all the people who would be appropriate to sell the book to individually at each house. Okay. So if I have a fantasy novel, I need to know which person does this particular kind of fantasy novel at Tor, at Avery, at um, you know, uh, uh, you know, at Random House, at HarperCollins, at Voyager, at any of the places that we might be going to, at Del Rey. Um, and then our job is to write the proper uh, pitch letter, or have a phone call with the editors, understand why we're going to the particular editor at the particular publishing house that we're going to, um, and then be able to sell them. Then our job is to uh, monitor that submission, and then hopefully when an editor likes it, to negotiate the contract and to manage the author's career. Publishers or editors are not responsible for that part of it. Publishers are responsible for making sure that they get good books that they can sell the most copies of. And that is, and I also have the opportunity to represent any kind of book I wish, as long as I'm good at that. I don't represent young adult fiction typically, because many years ago I was trying to do so, and I had an assistant who took me aside after like the third book that I couldn't sell and said, you're not selling this because you're bad at it. Uh, and she was gutsy, and she actually owns her own agency now. Her name is Danielle Burby. She's amazing. And she said, you don't understand what the tropes are. You don't understand the genre. I understood middle grade. I had middle graders at the time. My children were the right age for that. I understood the language better. I understood what they were looking for. Did not have that in young adult. So I let other people who were better at it do it. But what I did know was how to talk to editors at lunches and coffees and drinks and conferences and everything else, to learn who the right people were to do the right kinds of books that I also enjoyed representing. And so that's what, if somebody comes to me and wants me to represent them, that's what they're buying. They're
Yeah.
buying that knowledge more than anything else, is that I've had the 19 years of talking to people.
I mean, just the idea of finding out who is the current editor at Tor for a particular genre is
Mhm.
mind-boggling to me. So if I had a book, I would absolutely not have the confidence to just randomly approach an editor. So
Right. And you also couldn't
yeah.
really. I mean, you might be able to, because people might know you, but the average person who does not know people, um, the publishing houses typically don't often take
Yeah.
unsolicited queries anyway. They need to be agented. So it's helpful to have people who know what they're doing in that. And by the way, and there are resources for that. And agents do like when authors are well researched, and do have a sense of, oh, my dream editor is the person who did this book, or my dream editor is the person who did that book, and know sometimes who that is. And there are websites, I mean, Publishers Marketplace, which is the key internal website that agents and editors and publishers use, has spent years developing a database of deals that have been made within all the genres. And it's what we use for our research. If I have a book that doesn't quite fit in with everything that I typically do, I will go and I will try to find, 30 deals that were done within that space and see who the editors are that keep showing up.
Okay.
Um, and then I'll often ask them for lunch, uh, and see if I'm right, and or at least have a conversation or a Zoom at this point. So
So,
that's what I try to do.
okay. So is a lot of this various social kind of networking then? You mentioned taking people to lunch or kind of
Right.
chatting.
It's funny. Everybody assumed that what editors and agents mostly do is read and write, which we do an awful lot of. But we also do a lot of talking. And it was one of the surprising things. I mean, when I started back in publishing as an agent's assistant and an agent, my wife would, I would leave and she'd say, "Well, what's your day like?" And I'd say, "Well, I'm having lunch with this editor from Simon and Schuster." And she would say, "Why are you having lunch? Why aren't you sitting down at your desk and reading?" And I said, "Trust me, you need this, and it will come back to be useful." And it really did. And I guess the best example of this, and really illustrates everything that you'd want to know is, I represent a guy named S.A. Cosby, who is big thriller crime fiction writer, black writer from Virginia, writes very dark, very gritty, and very successful novels. And I met him at a conference at a conference called BoucherCon in St. Petersburg, Florida in 2018. And had spoken to him and had heard that he was that he wrote pretty gritty stuff. The evening that we had met, I was talking to two editors near the bar in the hotel in St. Pete. Sorry, forgive me. I'm just gonna get rid of that. I apologize.
Sure.
Um, the, and one of the editors, a woman named Christine Koprash, said, "I'm terribly frustrated." I said, "Why are you frustrated?" She said, "Because she said I uh look like a white girl who shouldn't be doing crime fiction, and we have a boy who does it, and he gets all of the stuff, and he doesn't even like blood, and I'm fine with that. And why doesn't anybody give me anything dark?" Well, I said, noted. And the next time I have something, I'll send it to you instead of to him. And then I got Sean, that's S.A. Cosby. I got Sean's novel Blacktop Wasteland, which is really dark and had people burying wood chippers, and it's like it's a lot. And so I called Christine and I said, "All right, you wanted dark and bloody? I'll give you dark and bloody." And she ended up buying it and has now sold, 750,000 copies of his books. And and it's because we had been I never would have thought that. because I knew Christine, sure, but I thought about her for things that may have been less bloody for all the reasons that she was frustrated, right? And so those kinds of things. I knew an editor at Dutton was a dancer, and so I had a dance book and sent it to her. And and those are the kinds of things that you end up learning that when you have a particular kind of book can give you a little bit of an advantage. So there is a social aspect to it, much more than people think there is. And also, you have to have good relationships with the people that you're working with. Because I spend a lot of time talking to editors, sometimes in very awkward ways. You have to negotiate contracts, you have to negotiate deals, they tell you, hey, your guy is late, or the book's not selling, and we have to be on top of those things and talk to people about that. So there's a lot of relationship building that you end up having in addition to the understanding of what kind of book you think will be able to sell and how are you going to make it better, which are the other things that we have to do.
So I knew that agents sold books, right? But I'd never realized how much like the social aspect contributes, like going to these conferences, meeting these people. That's just it seems like very time consuming. And when there's not a definitive like gain, like an immediate gain, sometimes does it feel a little bit like almost wasted time?
Right. Um, no, it doesn't feel like wasted time. I mean, the hope is that it's not wasted.
Yeah.
Um, Certainly, yeah. So Simon Lipscar, my first boss, had said that there are three things that every successful agent needs to have. And he may not even remember saying this to me because he likes to give lists. But he said there are three things, and you need to have um, you know, talent and or taste. You need to have patience and you need to have luck. And that you can't have three. You can't have two of the three. You have to have all three. And some people spend years trying to do it and don't have the luck. Some people maybe don't have the same, kind of understanding of the taste of a particular market and they may wash out. But the most people who don't make it as agents don't because they either aren't patient enough or aren't able to be patient enough. Because fundamentally, it's a very long game. And anybody who talks, I know that there are a lot of people online who will give the breakdown of how a $100,000 advance is earned, and it sounds great. You have $100,000. Well, it's over 3 years and four different payments, and you have to give your agent your percentage, and you have no guarantee that you're going to earn further. Well, the agent is 15% of that. So, I sell $100,000 book. I'm delighted. It's a great deal. But I'm getting $15,000, and that may be over 3 years. So or 2 years at minimum and over several different payments. So in order to be able to make it, it is a long game because you have to have contracts on top of contracts and a lot of them. And it's an interesting thing, but there are definitely a lot of stress moments of can you make it? Can you survive another year? Are you going to sell enough? It can be quite stressful. Um, and so go if I need to go to BoucherCon to meet, 100 writers and 40 editors in the space of 3 days, I consider that money well spent because I can just that's a lot of lunches, right? And then you get to know it. So I consider all of that to be investments in my career. And you have to learn and you have to be willing. And it's hard sometimes because the folks who get into the business because it's about reading and writing can sometimes be brought up pretty short by the amount of extroversion that's really necessary in this,
Yeah.
and it's a funky aspect of it that people don't really hear about so often.
So I've spoken to a lot of self-published authors, and it
Sure.
seems like the number one thing they struggle with is they don't know who to go to, right? They don't know how to get their book a cover. They don't know where to publish. They don't know what tags to publish under, or like any of these things that I imagine you have so much knowledge of.
Well, yes and no. It's an aspect of the business that we touch on
Yeah.
but don't necessarily get deeply into. I mean, I represent authors who have published independently, and we've helped them out and helped with the publication process and the and formatting and all of that. But generally speaking, we do it in a pretty cookie cutter way when it's going to be independent versus when it's with a traditional publisher. Just because that's the kind of agency we run, and there are agents that do more of that. But I would not necessarily, I mean, it's funny, my son has started to, he's an actor and he goes into, and he's doing narration for audiobooks. And so I'm learning a little bit more from him about the way the audiobook world works in addition to what I know from the more traditional ways. But I would not necessarily be the person that a self-published author would want to talk to about the top designers uh for covers.
Mhm.
I could give an indication from my experience in working with traditional publishers of what you might want to or not want to have on the cover. And that you want your title to be very clear because it's going to be this big on the majority of what you're selling and not this big on a book itself for the majority of people who are self-publishing because it'll mostly be digital. And so there are those aspects of it, but not necessarily the ins and outs of the design and production process as much as I know about the editorial process and the ability, to do that. The other thing that I found, and you can tell me if you have the same experience, is that the other thing that a lot of self-published writers struggle with is discoverability and is marketing because fundamentally the ability to get past one or two levels beyond friends and family is a very hard thing to do. um and where I think the majority of people start to get frustrated. Is that what you found?
Yes. And I know I can think of two, maybe three breakthrough self-published authors that have gone on to be big mainstream names,
Hmm.
or at least larger mainstream names. Um, and yeah, it's incredibly difficult. How do you promote something that like there's not a team behind you where if there's a brick and mortar place, typically they have an entire publicist department. So,
Right. Right. And that's very true. And you know, sometimes it is a matter of how much money can you throw at it. If you can't throw a lot of money at it, then it is pounding the pavement in different ways, and trying to get your name out in ways that a lot of people who are writers, you know, it's not what they got into it for. I have a lot of writers who are like, I don't want to be on TikTok because I don't particularly want to be out there talking. I want to be writing. I want to have my characters speak for me because that's what I'm in this for. Um, and that's a really tricky thing. And it's made, yeah, it's a very democratic, almost anarchic industry in those ways. But it also kind of explains why traditional publishing exists and and why they have this infrastructure that they do.
Yeah. So thinking about all of that, you mentioned that you've been in the business for a really long time. How has being an agent and editing and being in the book world changed over that time?
That's a great question because it's been in no, it's been in a lot of different ways. And what I always think about is when I'm at a conference with writers, what are they freaking out about? Because that's been in several different places over the course of years. So the first thing right after 2007, besides that there was the economic downturn and like half of publishing was fired.
Mm.
Um, like three-quarters of my friends were fired in 2 weeks in June of 2008, and it took them a while to it took everybody a while to sort of regain composure from that. But then it was, okay, uh what is electronic publishing going to be? What is Kindle going to do for you? Is it going to destroy publishing? Is it going to change it fundamentally? Is it going to be is everybody going to self-publish and succeed? Is everybody going to self-publish and fail? And is that going to take the industry down with it? And the fear of Amazon and the fear of digital publishing was probably 3 or 4 or 5 years straight, um, while it was still the Wild West, of what people were talking about. And I think Amazon and digital marketplaces are have been one of the biggest game changers and disruptors of the whole thing for good or for ill. Um, when I sell books to the Amazon imprints, one of the things we talk about is the fact that it has the worst and the best marketing simultaneously, right? Because you're not in brick and mortar public bookstores. On the other hand, the algorithm is huge and powerful and enormous, so it can make or break you. But as far as ebooks and as far as Kindle publishing went, at this point, it's another line on the profit and loss statement. It's pretty predictable in different genres what percentage of your sales are going to be ebooks versus what percentage will be hardcovers or paperbacks or mass markets or audiobooks. And so now it's calmed down. People aren't scared of it anymore, right? Now, then came the rise of well, actually, after that, in the period of time I've been in it, came the death of Borders, uh, which for crime fiction was massive
Yeah.
because it was one of the biggest sellers of mysteries and thrillers in the marketplace, more than many of the other places. So when that went, there was a real concern that genre publishing was going to have a really hard time, which it did for a while, for a good while. And I don't know, we still sometimes hear from some of the older editors, oh, remember when we had Borders? At this point, it's been 15 years. It's like enough already. You have to adjust by now. Uh, and they were not replaced by Amazon like one to one in that way, in the way that I think they thought it would be. And they were also not replaced by the big box stores, which were the other disruptors, right? The Targets and the Walmarts and the Costcos, which do a great job for a particular percentage of the market, but not everybody. It's a very small number of books that they have and getting smaller.
Hmm.
And if you go to the UK, it's the supermarkets, and they're getting smaller in terms of what they're publishing, or what they're taking on. So that's tricky, because that's been something that is not as predictable and also has been problematic. Um, and then the last thing that has really been the disruptor has been audiobooks, and that's to the good. And to sort of to the bet if your good versus bad is the more books that sell, the better, which I think we can agree is a good thing. Uh, you know, uh, then the rise of audiobooks was something that was not particularly anticipated, and then exploded, as people went to streamers and went to and started listening to things on their commutes in a way that they had not, maybe previously had done the radio or CDs or Walkman, now became podcasts and audiobooks. And it's fascinating, and it has been an enormous had a huge impact on the industry, I think, in a great way.
I do wish that physical books you could buy the audiobook at the same like the same time, like maybe there was a combined price.
Right. Well, they do that for ebooks. They just don't
Yeah.
do that for they don't do that for the hardcovers or the paperbacks at this point. I suspect that there will be opportunities for that, and there will be bundles for that, because there seems to be an increasing market for that. And somebody will end up doing a test case or two of those and find that they will be successful. Because I suspect they will be successful, because I think the ebook version of that is successful.
Mhm. I think because of the rise of limited edition physical copies, the audiobook accompaniment might be kind of like the next step in that, if that makes
Hmm.
sense. Yeah.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right, and we've been seeing that. It's funny, another disruptor, which is not as present in the U.S. market, is the limited edition versions of the export editions in Europe,
Yeah.
the English language export editions in countries like the Netherlands and Sweden and Germany, where there's a very large push to learn English. Folks are buying those editions in English, sometimes to the detriment of the local language edition, because they're often less expensive. But, then there's the question of, oh, is it cool? Is it deckled? Is it, shiny? Uh, and we see, and that's so much more in either YA or romance or romantasy or fantasy than it is in anything else.
Yeah, for sure. Um, I don't anticipate, the next murder mystery to have blood splatter sprayed edges or anything.
Uh, Richard Osman might.
Okay. So how do you go about finding what clients you're going to represent, or how do they find you?
Sure. That changes over time for most agents, because you start out as an assistant and you're reading your boss's stuff. And so you're reading, there's the famous slush pile. The slush pile, which used to be lots and lots of paper, and which now is lots and lots of emails. And people come and hopefully have looked you up and know, for me, know that I represent murder mysteries and come to me and say, hey, you do this. I wrote one. I think you'd like it. And you get a query, and everybody has their instructions of how they want to get queries. Different people have very different styles. I, for example, never liked to get synopses, like
Hmm.
sort of formal synopses, because I find that synopses take all of the life out of any story, and just make it very, very dry and not interesting. And I really want a 4 or 5 paragraph letter and then the first 5 pages of the book. And people are like, "Oh, I don't want to send you the first 5 pages. I'll send you pages 87 to 92." I said, "Well, I don't start reading at page 87. I start reading on page 1, so you better get me." But my goal is in all of those. And so I started out reading Simon and Dan's slush piles of what they got. And then after you hit a certain amount of time served where you understand what the quality of writing, how high the bar is in order to be publishable, and that, a very high percentage of books don't meet that bar from the query letter. Uh, and then another great percentage don't meet it in the first 5 pages. And so you're then looking, okay, of the small percentage of queries that you get, how many am I going to put myself out there to show my boss? Okay. And so that's a few. And so you spend a lot of time, honing that so that hopefully you can get a couple of wins with your boss. Then every so often, there's a book that you say, hey, he won't like this, but it appeals to me. And then you start talking to writers and you say, okay, I can't really represent anything right now, but why don't we work together on revisions in this? And by the time we're done, I could have the ability to talk to my boss and maybe be able to take you on either in conjunction with them or together. So the first thing that I did was I worked with my boss's clients and I worked with a few writers who came along who I figured I would like better than they would. So that's the first thing. Then when you start to get permission to take books on yourself, then you put yourself out there and you go to conferences and you go on to uh, query manager and say, okay, I'm open for business. And folks find you and they say, okay, well, this is a new agent at doing this kind of book, and then you get swamped with a lot of unsolicited queries. You get a few, hopefully you make a sale. Same time, every second cousin who's written a book comes to you
Yes.
and says, "Hey, the most embarrassing thing was a friend of my mother's who wrote a romance novel, and I asked if I would read it, and I said, well, I don't really do much romance, but I'll read it because it's you. And I'm 7 pages in, and it's incredibly raunchy. I'm like, Irene, oh my God, you know, uh, and and that can be awkward. Uh, and I'm sure that you get all manner of folks who directly or peripherally coming in and asking if you can read their stuff. So that's the other thing. But once in a while it works. A colleague of my wife's had written a novel and it turned out to be great, and I represented him. And and those kinds of things are wonderful when they happen. And generally speaking, the ability to get referrals becomes a significant piece of any agent's business. And as you get older and more experienced and presumably more successful, then you get better referrals. And then no, and then authors will come to you, and people are always dissatisfied with their agents. And so they're because you gotta blame somebody.
I guess.
and so I will get people coming to me saying, I've just parted with my agent. It was very amicable, meaning it wasn't, and would you take a look at my thing? And sometimes I'll get editors saying, hey, one of my authors who I think is great just parted ways with their agent, and would you take a look at their stuff? And as time passes, that gets bigger and bigger. Um, and the other thing that happens is as time passes, you start out because of the things that I was telling you before about the economics, you have to take on a lot of things early in order to make your first sales, in order to be able to make any money at this.
Hmm.
So you start out casting a pretty wide net. And I might have taken on, some mommy bloggers who I might not have taken on when I thought I was, doing this but they turned out to be great. I took on some children's books that were slightly different from what I thought I was going to take on. I took different kinds of adult books from what I thought. As I've gotten more experienced and as I have more clients, I've been able to narrow that down into the kinds of books that I really enjoy. Because I now can sell them after 19 years at, somewhat higher prices to start off with, and be able to, make money that way rather than having to take whatever I think might sell for a couple of bucks, right? So that's the way that changes. Now I don't take unsolicited queries because it wasn't fair. I have like 48 clients. It's a lot of clients. I am I spend a lot of my time managing their stuff. I have their new manuscripts all the time. I have different contracts in different stages all over the place. And if I were also trying to read 100 queries, a week, it would be impossible. And my assistant would be swamped trying to do that as well. And so we it doesn't mean that I have not taken anybody on in the last 2 years since I've been closed, but they've now just been referrals. And when I do get people who don't realize that I'm closed and they seem to be good, I'll sort of siphon them out to my colleagues in the agency.
Okay. So by referrals, are you talking about like maybe someone approaching an agent and that agent has never done any crime fiction? And so they're like, well, I do know Josh and he might be willing to look at your stuff. Is that the kind of referral you mean?
Often,
Okay.
yes. Yeah, and what I always do when I do one of those as well,
Yeah.
is I will say, make sure that you put in your subject line through Josh or, through HG or whatever it's going to be. Because if I get something saying, through Mark Tavani, I will look at it because I will know that at least there's been a conversation and there's a reason to look at it. Because somebody has been willing to put their name to the recommendation.
That makes sense. And you have such a large and diverse agency. I can't imagine that you can represent everybody, but you do have quite a few genre people and like middle grade fiction, all kinds of stuff in your own agency, right?
Right. Yeah, we essentially, as we've grown, have tried to pick off genres as often as we can, or had people who may not have anticipated doing science fiction realize they like it, that kind of thing. And so at this point, we have several people who represent what would be, non-genre fiction. So literary fiction, upmarket, commercial, call it what you will, where people are neither, killing or having sex all the time, or trying to do either, or flying in space. but uh yeah, we have several of those. We have a number of people who do precisely the other. Uh, and so, in the, Heather Fawcett kind of world, in the romantasy world, and we have some people, and they're a little younger than I am, who, in the same way that I wasn't any good at YA, they're really good at this. So Ellen Goff and Bree Johnson and John Cobb, who really understand these genres very, very well and have done nicely on them. We have people who represent almost entirely picture books, which is its own thing and
Yeah.
its own incredible talent to understand both, if you have 108 words in a book, they need to count.
Yeah.
Uh, right? And then being able to figure out what publishers, uh, are appropriate for those, and when you have illustrators or no illustrators on those. And so, I mean, it's a totally different part of the business. What we don't really do much of is we don't do um, you know, straight genre romance. We don't do a lot of very sort of narrative nonfiction on sort of the memoir side of things. Some, but not a massive amount of it. And we don't do Christian publishing, not because we don't have people who are Christian, but because it's a whole different set of
Yeah.
uh, of editors and publishing houses and a market that you have to know or not. You either know it or you do not know it. And since that we don't have anybody who has said that that's their particular interest on the publishing side, it's certainly profitable, it's certainly interesting, but it's not what we have.
Okay. I do notice that the two authors that I've read from your agency, Heather Fawcett and, well, I guess Sergey and Maria Dyachenko,
Yeah.
they're very they break out of the mold of genre fiction, in my opinion, because of the way they're written. Is that something you guys look for when you're
Yes. Very, very much so. And I mean, I can speak better to Vita Nostra. I can speak better to the Duchenkos than I can to Heather, because my colleague Bree is her agent, but they do have in common the sort of transition from straight on genre to something else.
Yeah.
And in the Diachenko case of it, their translator, Julia Hersey, came to me with this, and she and I had worked on another book before that. She'd come to me with Boris Strugatsky's book, which is it was a kind of cozy mystery in a snowstorm in Germany, but where it turns out that it's like demons. And it's great. It is fantastic. But she said that her goal in life was to translate Vita Nostra, and she translated it on spec, uh, and then got to know the Dichenkos, and I read it and it blew my mind because it is this wonderful combination. When I had to pitch it, um, it's a hard book to pitch because it's kind of dark adult Russian Harry Potter. You
That's a good
know,
description.
if Harry Potter, if all the Russianness and darkness about that were forward, that's kind of what it was. Uh, and and you don't typically have people turn into parts of speech. But so if it had simply been a an academic fantasy novel, I would have liked it because I like that kind of book. If it had been, a straightforward, dark Russian novel, I would have liked that too because I like that too. Combination of it was amazing, but also the language in the book itself is kind of cooler than it has any right to be, right? Uh, it's got a great style to it, and a weird lightness, even as it is blowing your mind.
Yeah. Uh, The
Uh,
the movement of it is so unique, it feels like to me. I've not read many Russian novels, so I don't really know.
well, I would say to you that the drinking is more depressing in others. You know, um, I really I felt them having their beers in their dorm rooms and all of that, and their vodkas. But beyond that, um, I knew that it had the special it,
Mhm.
right? But I also knew that it was a kind of weird, a weird pitch.
Yeah.
And I had an editor, David Pomerico, who bought the trilogy eventually. Um, he and I had a conversation, actually over a baseball game, uh, where we were talking about the kind of books that we like, and he led me, I don't remember exactly what the part of the conversation was that led me to believe that he was like exactly the right kind of editor for it. But I said to him, I did not send that book out on submission widely. I sent it to David and said, essentially, I know that you are going to love this book. And I know you're going, and he had bought another one of my books before by Dana Cameron. It also had sort of elements of this, a thrillery, fantasy mashup. And I essentially said to David, I am so sure that you like it that I almost would quit publishing if you didn't. That's how sure I am. And please don't make me quit publishing because I really like my job. And turns out he loved it, and it worked out well. Um, but it's an unusual take on the academic novel. It's an unusual take on metaphysics and philosophy and what they're trying to do there. And it's just a very, I love being able to do that. It's not the same. um, I think that what has happened in romanticy is an element of that, of people saying, I'm going to take what we think of in genre and I'm going to turn it on its head a little bit. I'm going to add a little something to it. These guys, the Duchenkos, didn't quite do it from the same direction because I think that a lot of folks who have taken it on the younger side came from having read in an era where there was YA and in an era where there was sort of, sophisticated middle grade novels and books that could, not adhere to all of the rules that, previously had existed for the different genres. So that's why we're seeing it also in mystery novels. It's why we're seeing it also, in science fiction and fantasy. But the Dichenkos were a little bit ahead of their time on that, and created something where somebody who loved Harry Potter would love that book. But where you're like, oh my God, what is the last 200 pages about? You know?
I still don't know. I
I, when my wife read it a little while after I had published it, um, we were on vacation and she had stayed up late to read it, and all of a sudden she's punching me and goes, "What do the last 50 pages mean?" I'm like, "I don't remember." I all I know is that it blew my mind, but remind me. Uh, and
so
I had to
much
read.
happens in the book too, and it's just moves
Right.
so quickly, and I think that's why it kind of
No,
So,
it's
um, so, uh, is there anything you'd like people to know about getting an agent before we sign off today?
sure. I think that first thing is that there's a perception that mostly what agents do is say no. And that on some level agents are sadists. And that we spend our lives wanting to say no and break everybody's hearts. And it can feel that way. And I understand why that perception exists. But I will tell you that I wake up in the morning and every agent I know, and I know a lot of them, wakes up in the morning wanting to say yes. We want to make people's careers. And the only way that we stay in business is if we make a number of people's careers. And so that fundamentally, the fact that we have to say no to a lot of people has to do with the number of things we get,
Yeah.
the number of people, and the bar, that there's not an infinite number of books that can be published at any given time. So we're constrained by that. But that there's no greater feeling for us than to be sitting down in an evening, pick something up that we've never seen before, and say, "Oh my God, this has it." That's what we're in this for, is to succeed, not and to make people fundamentally happy and to make their careers and not to crush dreams. And
You,
I think it's an important distinction.
well, it seems like an agent has to be your biggest cheerleader at the beginning, you know?
Yes.
So
Right. Well, for and actually presumably throughout your career.
hopefully,
Um,
yes.
because we represent careers, we don't represent books.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
and we don't work on a one book deal. We work on we are your agent until we're not your agent. Yeah, and that's which however that works out. But fundamentally we have to, and if I don't feel it, then the editor who has 100 things to read also will get that
Yeah.
and and then won't believe in it either. So you want the person who's going to be the best for you, who is going to put themselves out there and really work hard for you.
I mean, yeah, that makes sense. This has been an incredibly enlightening conversation for me.
Oh, I'm so glad. It was so much fun, and I know I talk a lot. I hope that was okay.
It's perfect because I don't know a whole lot about this part of the book world, so thank you.
Very welcome. If you or any of your folks want to, you know, uh, want to follow up, I'm very happy to do so.
Perfect. Um, and going forward, I do have an interview with Julia, the translator for the
Uh,
Diachenkos.
Great.
Uh,
Yeah, that'll be wonderful. She really she understands it deep inside her.
she's amazing in the way that she could translate those books, let
Yep,
alone.
yep, yep. No, she is her own special genius.
Well,
So,
thank you so much for being here
yeah.
today.
Thanks,
Um,
Dakota. I really appreciate it. I really thank you for having me on.
I hope this conversation is helpful for other people who are maybe they don't know about this aspect of publishing as well. So, thank you.
I hope so too. Thank you so much.
And I hope everybody out there has a lovely night, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
Take care.